So, welcome to our webinar from the research chair on security, safety and integrity in sport. I'm Sylvie Parent, holder of the research chair. So today we are very lucky to have a new member of the research chair with us, Lynn Ahrens. Lynn Ahrens is really well known around the world for her work regarding sport pedagogy. So I will present her a little bit, and right after I will let the floor to her to present about challenging the beliefs driving a controlling style in coaching. So what the research reveals. So it will be very interesting. Prof. Lynn Ahrens lead the research group in sport pedagogy in the Department of Movement and Sports Science, Faculty of Medicine and Health Science at Ghent University. Guided by self-determination theory, her mission is to generate new knowledge and practical insights that enable children, youth, and adults to develop, learn, and perform in safe and motivating contexts. Through her work, she has generated several paradigm-shifting insights regarding the demotivation style of teachers and sport coaches. Particularly relevant to the current chair is the work on controlling coaching. So your insight, Lynn, will be very important for everybody in this room. So we'll let you start when you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Sylvie. I will first try to share my screen. Can you see the PowerPoint now?
No, we don't.
You don't? Okay. I will check what is going wrong then.
Now we see a screen.
You see the PowerPoint now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, good morning to most of you, I think. In Belgium, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, but I understand it's 9 o'clock in the morning in Canada. So yeah, it's really exciting to be able to give this webinar for the share you are holding, Sylvie. I really want to thank you for the invitation and for Emily for arranging everything and putting everything in place. It's just so nice that there's a chair that is really dealing with this important topic, and it shows that, yeah, also in Canada, people are really concerned with the topic. So, yeah, thanks for inviting me, and thanks for all the participants for being here today. I hope I can give you a good start of the day if it's still morning for you. Throughout the PowerPoint, we have added some codes on the slides to the studies I will be talking about. So maybe if you like to save the papers, you can scan the codes throughout the presentation. So I'm going to start with a short video.
Rutgers basketball coach Mike Rice is out of a job. This comes after a video was aired showing him shoving, grabbing, and throwing balls at players, even using gay slurs during practice. The tape, broadcast on ESPN Tuesday, prompted outrage.
So, welcome everyone. Luckily, we live now in a world where these transgressive behaviors of sports coaches are increasingly challenged and questioned. Yet, at the same time, there are still some strong layman beliefs in sports that some harsh and controlling and pressuring practices are really needed if we want to push athletes towards excellent performances. And in Belgium, just as in many other countries around the world, there has recently, for instance, been a big scandal in gymnastics where some coaches were accused of really harassing and humiliating the gymnastic athletes. And yeah, when it came in the press, there was a big debate about it. So, like, some people were really questioning the coaches' approaches, while others were really defending them. Even saying, like, we would never have had the gold medal of Nina Derwal at the Olympics if the coaches would not have used these approaches. So if I ask my students in the third year of the bachelor program in physical education and movement science at Ghent University, whether they think these athletes would have obtained the same results if their coaches would have held a less pressuring style. Yeah, over 55% of them thinks that the chances are small. So all of this illustrates that there are still quite strong beliefs out there supporting a controlling style. And when we looked in the press after the scandal in gymnastics, quotes appeared like, yeah, such a style is really needed to create the necessary arousal to perform well. Or, yeah, it's the only effective way to instill discipline with athletes. Or real top athletes know how to cope with it. So people were saying like, it's a difference between a real athlete and someone who cannot cope with it. Those who can cope with it, they make it to the top. And then coaches also often reacted like, yeah, I'm really supportive most of the time. And my athletes, they understand. I mean it really well. I have good intentions. I want to make them better. And so they understand it and it does no harm. So these were some of the reactions we found on social media. And of course, as a scientist, yeah, we want to look at the evidence when building our arguments. That's why in this presentation, I want to challenge most of these layman beliefs by showing you some of our recent research. I want to apologize in advance because I'm going to mainly rely on studies from our own group, but there are many other interesting studies, of course, out there, but it was not the purpose of today to give an overview of everything that is available. So yeah, in my research group, we have been studying coaches' controlling style for over 15 years now. And yeah, we all know that sport coaches can exert a big impact on young children or adults. They are entrusted with a very important task to help them to learn and develop in safe and nurturing environments. And yet sometimes we see that they resort to a controlling style. And we study coaches' control from the perspective of self-determination theory. And we see 4 components in this controlling style. And the first is the controlling use of rewards. So this is when coaches use rewards or punishments to control athletes' behavior or to force them in a certain direction. Another component is intimidation. When we see a coach shouting, like here in the picture, to a child in front of other children, or when they humiliate an athlete, we talk about intimidation. Another component is conditional regard. And this means that those athletes who are performing well, they get more attention, and those who do not live up to your expectations or are performing less well, they receive less attention from the coach. And then in sports, there's also a 4th component that is really important, and that is excessive personal control. And this is when the coach tries to control everything the athlete does, also, for instance, how the leisure time is fulfilled. And so we have developed a circumplex model of coaches' motivating and demotivating styles. And when we look at controlling coaching, we say it's characterized by 2 main characteristics. And the first is when a coach is controlling, he's highly or she is highly directive. So it's characterized by high levels of directiveness. But this is combined with a highly need-thwarting component. So need-thwarting means that the athlete feels pressured, feels incompetent, and feels rejected by the coach. This controlling coaching style can further be divided, and you can see it here, in a demanding and a domineering approach, with the domineering approach being more need-thwarting than the demanding approach. So what characterizes a demanding style? It's pressuring communication, like really commanding and putting pressure, punishments and rewards, forcing your opinion upon the athletes, and also being highly evaluative. For instance, I'm into basketball. In basketball, you see this when, for instance, youth sport coaches, they substitute a player each time they make a mistake. So this is really like an example of demanding coaching. With domineering coaching, it becomes even harsher. So then there's intimidation taking place, guilt induction, and also shaming. And so we did a study with over 500 gymnastic athletes, and we examined whether the degree to which coaches were high in controlling, as we just defined controlling coaching, how it related to the degree to which these athletes had experienced abuse. And so controlling coaching was very strongly positively related to psychological abuse, which is not so surprising because there are many components that are very similar when you look at the definition of psychological abuse and controlling coaching, particularly the domineering part. But we also found very strong relationships between physical abuse and sexual abuse. So from this study, we can already conclude that maybe when we scan the coaches' motivating and demotivating styles with our circumplex model, and they are high on controlling coaching, it might already be a red flag that with this coach, there might be an increased risk for harassment and abuse to take place. So this was a short introduction for you to help you to understand how we define controlling coaching. And now I want to challenge some of the beliefs I presented in the beginning of the presentation. So the things people write on social media when a case is coming in public. So the first is that without a controlling style, you cannot install discipline. So for us, the distinction between a controlling style and a structuring style is essential to answer this question, because both are high in directiveness, but while a controlling style is need thwarting, a structuring style is need supportive. And so I want to illustrate this with 2 videos. And you can answer for yourself whether the first video is rather controlling or rather structuring to instill discipline. So this was the first video. I think it's pretty clear. When we show this video to experts, yeah, they are really like, yeah, this is really controlling, domineering, especially when the teacher then starts to focus on one student and calls him a sissy in front of the other students. But when we show the same video to teachers, they are more mild. They say, okay, maybe the behavior is not warranted, but yeah, the students are not really putting effort into the lessons, so they understand that the teacher, yeah, resorts to these kinds of practices. When we have students watch the video, most students rate the teacher as too negative. But 4 of them also said, yeah, I think it's rather humoristic, and 3 were more neutral about it. So here you can already see that there's a difference in perception between those who, the experts in controlling coaching or in harassment and abuse, and how other people look at it. So in this video, the teacher was really structuring because he was setting clear regulations, giving clear instructions. He was also outlining what would happen if they would not follow the rules. So this is really important that when we talk about motivating coaching, it does not mean that the teacher or the coach can adopt a laissez-faire attitude where everything is possible. There can still be some directions. There need to be some directions and structure, but here it's really in a neat supportive way without humiliating the students. And it becomes even more motivating when the teacher can do this in an autonomy supportive way. And I will now show a study where we tested the difference between setting boundaries in an autonomy supportive way versus a controlling way. So we wanted to test whether installing discipline in different ways elicits different outcomes. And so we choose judo for this study because it's a sport where discipline is highly valued. And so we had about 100 Belgian judo athletes. They were 13 years old. And we had them read a comic book. And in the comic book, 2 judo athletes are misbehaving. And depending on the condition the 100 judo athletes were randomly assigned to, the coach in the comic book either reacted in an autonomy supportive or controlling way. So it looked like this. So the 2 athletes are misbehaving, and in the autonomy supportive condition, for instance, the coach would say, okay, this cannot continue like this. You can now choose whether you try another partner or you continue together, but in a more serious fashion. So this is like really a combination of structure and autonomy support, because the coach is really setting the boundaries for the behavior and is also giving a choice to the athletes. Then in the controlling condition, the reaction would be different, like something like, now I'm done with you guys, enough is enough. If you cannot behave, you can sit on the bench for a few minutes until I decide you can join again. So here you see really like setting the athletes aside and punishing them, which is part of a controlling style. So they were divided in 2 conditions. So they either read the autonomy supportive comic book or either the controlling comic books. They could not compare. And then we asked them to fill out a questionnaire, and they, if they would be taught by the coach in the comic book, how they would react to the behavior of the coach. And so we found that those in the autonomy supportive condition anticipated significantly more need satisfaction, so they would feel more competent, more autonomous, and more related to the coach, and oppositely, less need frustration. We also found that those who had read the controlling comic book anticipated more anger towards the coach, and they were also significantly more likely to defy the coach, so to do exactly the opposite of what the coach expected. So the belief that controlling practices are needed to instill discipline was not supported in this study, and also not in our other work. The evidence shows that controlling practices are less effective to instill discipline when compared to autonomy supportive practices. And so I can recommend the guide who is available on the website of SIMS, because I think the examples who are in there are really great examples of autonomy supportive ways and structuring ways of supporting discipline. So I think it nicely aligns with what we would suggest based on our studies. So I think it's a great guide because it's so practical and it can be directly used by coaches. So it's on the website, so go there and read it. So that was for the first belief. Then a second belief is, controlling coaching, it might be bad for the well-being of the athlete, but when it comes to performance, you really need it. So that's also something we wanted to test in our studies. And so we did a study with over 200 Flemish adult volleyball players, and we had them report on their coach's controlling style. We found that when the athletes rated their coach as more controlling, they were more likely to experience anxiety towards a game. They were also more likely to report feelings of burnout. And they were less likely to say that they had made significant progress over the past season. So Here, of course, it's all athlete reported and it's cross-sectional, but at least in the eyes of the athlete, when the coach was more controlling, they had made less progress. We then built on that work by questioning 26 Flemish coaches and for each coach, 7 athletes. So this came to 190 Flemish volleyball players and their coaches. And we followed them during 5 consecutive games. And after each game, we asked the coach to rate his or her satisfaction with the team's performance. And for each of the athletes who participated in the study, we asked the coach whether to rate the individual progress that athlete had made during the period between the previous game and this game. And then we asked the athletes to rate the coach's game-specific coaching style and their need-based experiences during the past game. And so in this study, we found that during games in which the coach was more controlling, the athletes reported less need satisfaction, more need frustration, and the coach was less likely to be satisfied with the team's performance, and also indicated that the athletes had made less progress. So here again, we found that the more the coaches were controlling, the worse they rated the performance of the team. And so here it was multi-informant because the athletes reported on the coach style and the coach reported on the team's performance. So yeah, in relation to the second belief, whether controlling coaching is needed to stimulate performance, our evidence shows that it rather hampers performance than stimulates performance. So if you want to read more about this paper, you can find it here. Then in relation to the third belief, it's the belief that elite athletes are something special and controlling coaching may be detrimental for some, but not for all people. So we did some studies where we really examined whether controlling coaching may not be detrimental for everyone. The first study was a study with secondary school students, and it were mainly students from vocational track, and we measured at the beginning of the study their motivation for physical education. And then we brought them to a computer class where they watched an experimentally manipulated video of a physical education teacher. And just as in the judo study, in the one room the teacher was autonomy supportive, and in the other the teacher was controlling. And so again, we asked them, how would you react, or what would you do if you would be in the class of that teacher? And so we confirmed that when the teacher was more controlling, students reported less engagement and more oppositional defiance. But what we wanted to see here is whether this was different according to the degree to which the students lacked motivation for physical education. So if they lack motivation, is a controlling style then perhaps effective to have them engaged? And overall, we found no interaction effects. So this means that these main effects, they were there for everyone. If we did find an interaction effect, it was actually against the layman belief, because we saw that those students high on motivation, they reported even more oppositional defiance when seeing a controlling teacher when compared to those students low on motivation. So when a teacher is then controlling with students low on motivation, you get perhaps like a negative spiral, because they will react with doing exact the opposite even more, which may elicit again a controlling reaction from the teacher. So is a controlling style detrimental when students or athletes perhaps are amotivated? Our study suggests yes, it is. We then went to examine what if an athlete can cope with controlling coaching in an adaptive way. Now let's imagine a soccer game and a coach at the sideline, maybe it's recognizable, and the coach is shouting at the players and constantly pressuring them to do better. So what would be an adaptive coping strategy? This could be accommodation. For instance, if Elisa tries to understand why the coach is shouting, if she says, for instance, yeah, I know he's trying to improve my performance and he is under great pressure himself, so he has the best intentions for the team. That would be like trying to accommodate with what the coach is asking. Or maybe another adaptive strategy could be negotiation. Like if Nele, after the game, talks to the coach and says, well, it really does not help me to play better when you shout. I play worse. Can you change that? That would also be an adaptive coping strategy. Now, let's see if athletes can rely on these adaptive coping strategies when they are exposed to controlling coaching. So in our volleyball study, we found that when we relate controlling coaching to these two coping strategies, there are no relationships. So this means that athletes are very unlikely to rely on these adaptive coping strategies when they are confronted with controlling coaching. Instead, we found that controlling coaching positively relates to compulsive compliance as a coping strategy. And this means actually that you really don't agree with the approach of the coach, but you set your personal preferences and feelings aside. You try to ignore that you're not feeling good about it. And you comply with what the coach is expecting from you, but you don't really feel good about it. And so compulsive compliance positively relates to anxiety, burnout, and reduces or negatively relates to performance. So is controlling coaching less detrimental when youngsters can cope with it in an adaptive way? Probably yes, because accommodation and negotiation are related to positive outcomes. But we see that it's very hard to rely on these coping strategies. When a coach is highly controlling, you are more likely to compulsively comply. So is a controlling style less detrimental for some people? A controlling style seems always detrimental, also for those high on amotivation. And it seems that athletes are very unlikely to be able to cope with it in an adaptive way. And here is again the link to the paper. Now we can move on to the fourth and final belief I want to challenge. And this is that the periodic use of a controlling style is no longer detrimental as long as the coach is generally need supportive. So in this study, we showed that autonomy support and controlling coaching need to be studied separately and measured separately because each of these styles relates to different outcomes. While a motivating style strongly relates to positive outcomes such as performance and well-being, the strongest relationships are found with between a controlling style and negative outcomes such as competitive anxiety, burnout, and defiance. And so to study whether the combination of both would not be detrimental, we relied on profile analysis. And so you can see 4 profiles here. And the third profile is a profile of coaches who are high on both autonomy supportive and controlling coaching according to their athletes. And so if we want to know whether this is not really bad, we can compare those with the first profile who says my coach is really autonomy supportive and really low on controlling coaching. If the combination would not be that bad, these two profiles would display a similar pattern of outcomes. But that is not what we and others found in our profile studies. We found that the group who combined both displayed a worse pattern of outcomes with higher controlled motivation, higher A motivation, and less autonomous motivation. We also examined the same question in a different paper in our volleyball study, where we had the athletes reporting on their coach's overall need supportive style at baseline. And so this allowed us to examine whether when the coach was overall need supportive at baseline, whether the game-specific controlling episodes would exert less detrimental effects. So we looked at the interaction between game controlling coaching and overall need supportive style. And if this interaction would be significant, these relationships would be reduced. But we did not find any interaction effects. So it is not because the coach is overall more need supportive that the specific use of game-specific controlling coaching, that the impact is reduced. So the fourth belief that the periodic use of a controlling style is no longer detrimental if it is combined with a generally need supportive style. This was also not supported by our studies. Overall, we find that the best need-based experiences and performance outcomes are achieved when coaches are highly need supportive and lowly controlling. So this brings me to the third part of the presentation. And this is, if controlling coaching is so detrimental, why are coaches adopting a controlling style? And so we did some studies looking at determinants of controlling coaching, where we distinguished between individual characteristics of coaches and contextual factors that may elicit controlling coaching. So let's have a look at the individual coach characteristics. In one of our studies, we found that when coaches' self-esteem or their self-worth depends on the performance of their athletes, they are more likely to engage in controlling coaching. Others have found that a controlling coaching style is related to narcissistic characteristics, that coaches who are more obsessively passionate about coaching and their sports are also more likely to adopt a controlling coaching style. And if coaches are experiencing psychological ill-being themselves, they are also more likely to adopt a controlling coaching style. Apart from these individual characteristics, there are also contextual factors that may elicit controlling coaching. And in one of our most recent studies, we showed that one of these factors is the absence of an ethical climate. For instance, if coaches do not know the ethical code, if they do not know whether there are safeguarding officers, if there's no ethical approach in the sports club, then coaches are more likely to adopt a controlling style. In alignment with that, if the board members in the sport club are highly evaluative, and if coaches, for instance, say that, if they lose a game, they will be judged more negatively, and there's really a performance culture in the sport club, then they are also more likely to adopt a controlling coaching style. And we found significant positive relationships for all four aspects of controlling coaching. And the reason why there's a positive relationship is because coaches themselves also experience need frustration in such an environment. So when the board is really emphasizing performance, the coaches feel more incompetent, pressured, and they also feel more rejected by the board members in the club, which then also explains partly why they engage in controlling coaching. So here you can find the link to the paper again. And then we also examined the leadership style of board members in the club. And in some of our papers, we found trickle-down effects. So when the coaches rate the board members as more controlling, they are also more controlling towards their athletes. So it's a mixture of individual and contextual factors that may elicit a controlling style, and of course also the opposite, because I did not present the results today. But if we can change the climate in the club and make it more safe and motivating, we can also elicit more positive coaching styles. And so this brings me to the final part of the presentation. What can we do to create more motivating and safer coaching environments? And so, I started this presentation with a video of Coach Rice, but later on during his career, he publicly stated that he wished he would have been more thoughtful about how he went about coaching his athletes. And this is something we often see, that when they look back, they understand it was not the most optimal way of coaching. And the coaches themselves also feel ashamed that they did it that way. So we think it's really important to develop effective interventions that promote need-supportive behaviors and that make coaches aware of these dynamics and the impact it has on the athletes. So in this study, we did a randomized control trial where we randomly assigned coaches to either an intervention group or a control group. And after that, the coaches filled out a questionnaire. And then part of the coaches, or half of the coaches, those in the intervention group, they went through an intervention program. And you can see it here. It was like an initiation session and then three 3-hour workshops. And so the initiation session, it was like really a general introduction to self-determination theory and different coaching styles. And then they had 3 workshops where the theory was translated into practice, like how can you implement motivating coaching in your training? What does it mean to engage in motivating coaching during games? And the 3rd workshop was about how can you set rules and boundaries in a motivating way? And so we had several measures in this study, but I will not be able to present them all. But just more generally, we saw a positive evolution from pre to post, where coaches in the intervention group became less controlling and more autonomy supportive and structuring when compared to those in the control group. This was also reflected in the athlete reports. So when the coach had participated in the intervention, the athlete's autonomous motivation increased from pre to post test, while it decreased in the control group, and these were significant interactions. As for engagement, we saw that in the control group it remained stable over time, while in the intervention group it significantly increased. So although intervention effects are not always very large, we see some positive changes when coaches participate in interventions on need-supportive coaching. And so we are now working with sports federations and Sport Flanders to implement all of these in sports. because we also learned that for coaches, it's really important that a workshop or an intervention is really sport specific. And so I am now going to show you a project we are doing with Basketball Flanders that is specifically directed at basketball coaches, but can easily be transferred to other sports as well. So what we do is, prior to going to the club, all coaches in the club fill out the questionnaire and they get a personalized profile about their motivating styles. So it's in Dutch here, but you see autonomy, support, structure, control, chaos, and they get their personal scores on their coach compass. This is something they get in advance with the explanation of the styles. And then they come to the session in the club where we give a workshop to them about the meaning of the different aspects of their coach compass. And for instance, we explain the difference between a controlling approach, my way or the highway, or setting your own ambitions central, and an autonomy supportive approach, which then is like asking, what does this athlete need from me? Who do I need to be for this athlete to be able to develop and perform in an optimal environment? We also engage with several exercises with them. So this is an example of an exercise where we try to make the coaches aware of the importance of seeing the entire person behind the athletes. So we ask them to write down the names of two randomly chosen athletes or players of their team. And then we ask them to make a mind map of everything that they know about this athlete, but it cannot be anything related to the sport. And this is often a very hard exercise for coaches. And so then we also ask them to reflect on how hard was this exercise for you. And after this exercise, then we start with concrete suggestions on how to getting to know your athletes better, because it's a precondition to be autonomy supportive. If you understand the athlete better and you are concerned about the athlete as an entire person, it's also more easy to develop a motivating coaching style. So that's just an example of an exercise in the interventions. Then another thing we do is we try to ask the question, what are at-risk situations for controlling coaching in this specific sport? And for instance, in basketball, it's for instance the pre-game speech in the dressing room. It's situations where the coach tries to increase the focus or the energy in the team, dealing with misbehavior or complaining athletes. Supporting competence for free throws on important moments in the game, for instance. We talk also about shared leadership and positive energy. The post-game analysis, because often this is different when the game is lost or won. And then in basketball, we also talk about substitutions. And so the way we do it is, I'm just going to illustrate with a small example from the workshop. We make some cases, like here, for instance, for substitutions. And the case goes as follows. Louis makes two bad decisions at the beginning of the game, resulting in ball loss. The coach takes Louis off the field after 2 minutes and brings in Bart. When Louis comes off the field, the coach gives Louis extra explanation and an encouraging pat on the back. Better later, Louis, it will work out. So we present this case, and then we ask the coaches to imagine they are Louis. How will they feel when they are on the bench? Imagine they are Bart. Where will their focus go to when they sit on the chair? and they discuss in small groups, and it elicits a lot of different points of view. And after that, we present some evidence, for instance, on the importance of allowing mistakes and getting the ability to correct your own mistakes, and also that the assumption that athletes will learn through oral instructions during a game, and then sitting on the bench thinking about it for the next 5 minutes, that this is working. So we try to challenge all of this. And we also then link it to the coach compass. So for instance, here there are some positive points in terms of motivating coaching, because it's clear what is important for the athletes. The coach is also following up and is giving a rationale for why he is substituting. So this is positive, that he takes the athlete aside and gives an explanation. But it's also very demotivating, because if you substitute after a mistake, you are emphasizing mistakes. It's also, the athlete can feel ashamed in front of the public. It's extremely evaluative, and it's also the use of punishment and rewards. And at the motivating side, you miss some opportunities for learning, because you're not stimulating the self-insight of the athlete. They may become dependent on your feedback, and the help you provide may not be that helpful in the perspective of the athlete. And so this is how we try to work with the coach compass in several situations that are important in that sport. And this is an example of a case that elicits a lot of discussion. But that's good, I think. So I have talked a lot about motivating and demotivating coaching, but as I have shown earlier, it's related in an important way to different forms of harassment and abuse. And in our study, where we looked at the impact of club climate, we found that when there is a more ethical club climate, the chances are lower that controlling coaching will lead to frequent psychological abuse. So the climate can be protective in the pathway from controlling coaching to psychological abuse. That's why it's really important that in Flanders we have now started up the Safe Sports Lab, and it combines the expertise we have at Ghent University on motivating and demotivating coaching with the expertise at Thomas More on the prevention of harassment and abuse, because of course it's not enough to only work on the motivating style of the coaches. So at Thomas More, they have developed over the past year several effective bystander interventions. And one of them is Safe Sport Allies. It's a really nice intervention. You can download all materials. They are available online. There are workshops for coaches, webinars for parents, fact sheets that can be used in the sports club, and video animation tools that can be spread in the sport clubs. And there are already also different versions of this intervention. For instance, there's a specific version developed for safe parasports. So these interventions are really helpful in creating these ethical climates that prevent controlling coaching from becoming abuse. And if we look at the assessment of these interventions, these are really positive, with over 80% of the coaches participating in the intervention recommending it to their peers. Coaches also say, it was kind of a wake-up call about how they themselves behave, others behave, what is problematic behavior and what is not. And it also is effective for increasing coaches' attitudes, behaviors, readiness to change, and their engagement and positive bystander behaviors. So after having engaged with the materials of Safe Sport Allies, coaches' confidence increased and they felt more encouraged to detect and respond to signs of harassment and abuse. So what we are doing for the moment in a new project is we are now going to 10 sport clubs in Flanders, and we are integrating our intervention materials on motivating coaching with those on the prevention of harassment and abuse. And so we go to the sports club and we ask the board members what is a concern they currently have in their sport club. And it can be like we don't have enough volunteers or we don't find coaches. So we start from their problem and then we try to broaden it up to deliver our workshops on motivating coaching and prevention of harassment and abuse. So this is now pilot tested during the coming years. So I'm really excited to see the results and how it is experienced in the sports club. So we are nearly by the end of the presentation. I find it really nice to be able to talk to you today about the beliefs driving controlling coaching. It's a topic that I'm really, really passionate about. It has been a central focus in my program of research. It's also something when I'm a youth sport coordinations myself in a basketball club, and it are always the same things that people are coming up with when they challenge what I'm talking about. So I think we need more and stronger evidence to really debunk the beliefs that are out there. And I hope that in spreading our joint results, we can create greater awareness around the topic and that we can make a tangible difference in creating a safer and more motivating environment for many children and adults around the world. So thank you very much for being here. I hope you had a good start of the day, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Emily, your mic is not open.
Sorry. Thank you, Lane, for that very interesting presentation. Wow, it was very useful. And so now it's time for questions. So if you have any question, you can raise your hand or write down your question in the chat box. And so does anyone have a question? Oh, someone. So Geneviève Majot, your first.
Hi, Lean. Thank you for being here. It's amazing that you get up at 3. That's amazing. So it's a good start of the day. Thank you for going in so much detail into all those studies. It was pretty amazing to see all your work in 1 hour. So it was very interesting and I learned a lot. I have 2 questions. So my first question is, when you teach about structure and autonomy support and the different motivating style, do you have the impression that coaches actually know the structuring behaviors that you want them to move towards, or you feel that they kind of don't have any alternatives to the controlling behaviors that they use? Is it the idea that they know what they are, but they don't use them, or they just don't know any alternative and they want to reach their performance goals or just their development goals?
I think both actually, because when they are there with their personal results, I notice that they often think they are not relying on controlling practices, But then, for instance, with the case of the substitutes, when they start discussing, you notice the controlling statements and the controlling practices. So when they first see the model, they think they don't do it. But then when we discuss specific cases, we can make them aware, okay, this is where you are now in the circumplex model. And then another big thing is, in Dutch, demanding, it's eisend in Dutch. And the term is similar to another term which refers to setting high expectations. So what I notice is that they really do not know how they can create a high performance environment without being controlling. So we really need to explain that, like, motivating coaching does not mean you cannot have high expectations. On the contrary, it's motivating when you set high expectations for your athletes, or preferably you set them together. But they really mix that up. Without a controlling approach, you cannot be focused, there will not be energy. So I think it's both. I don't know if I fully answered your question.
You did.
Okay,
Because
yeah.
I worked on a program that's more skill oriented and less theory oriented. And so I was wondering if you felt that when we teach SDT theory, if it was sufficient for coaches to really move from a controlling style towards a structuring style, or we really need to kind of explicitly talk about the skills that they can use to replace controlling behaviors.
Yeah, I think what I really believe is interventions in the club with all coaches in the club. So what I do notice, if they go to a session and then they come back in the club and it's not a culture in the club to try to change that, then they move very fast to their old habits. So what we are trying to do now is really intervene at the club level, trying to create a change in the club among several coaches and the youth sport coordinator. And my feeling is, like, if we really want to have change, it's a longer term process.
Okay.
Where they get the information in a coach session, and then there's a youth sport coordinator who goes to watch the training and gives feedback, and so it's a follow-up process. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
So Sylvie, it's your turn. You raise your hand.
First of all, thank you so much. I took like 12 pages of notes. It's so interesting. Like, wow. Okay. My question is kind of a follow-up of the Genevieve's question. It's regarding the fact that you mentioned and you tested it, that the context or the pressures from the context are very important. We also observe the same thing in our own results with coaches in Quebec. But how we can change this controlling styles from the organization, because it seems kind of similar. But do you know if there is intervention research about that? So how we change the organizational climate regarding pressure of performance for coaches, etc., etc. So it also, I think, needs to be a combination of training the coaches, but also changing the culture.
Yeah.
So what is your insights about that?
So we actually did an intervention. It's called Club Grade. It's like the upgrade of your club. And it's the PhD of Tom de Klerk. And what we did is, so the clubs could send in a problem they were struggling with, and this was the start of the intervention. And then we had, instead of working with the board only, we had two persons from each group in the club coming to the session. So it was two coaches, two parents, two athletes, two volunteers, 2 board members, and then we put the problem on the table. For instance, we do not find volunteers. And then we broadened it up, and almost in every session, for instance, communication is an issue. So for instance, they don't find volunteers. It's often, someone has been volunteering, but then someone in the board said something in a wrong way. And then they say, well, I didn't do it anymore because I didn't like how I was approached. And so you get all these different angles, and that's then the starting point to and we do the same principles then there, like also shared responsibility and how do you communicate with different coaches and volunteers and parents in the club. So that's how we try to change the motivating styles of board members. Yeah. So we also have like the coach compass. We also have it for board members. Yeah.
So next question, Stephanie. Did you hear me? Okay.
Hi, Eileen. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really interesting. I was wondering, it's an add-on, I guess, to Sylvie's question, and you partly answered it, but about the context, I find there are also sometimes coaches, so I teach future coaches. We have a bachelor's here in sport intervention. And some will talk about parents putting a lot of pressure and saying sometimes to them, you need to be tougher with my child. I want them to go to, these levels. So I want you to be even tougher on them. How would you advise these coaches to react to the parents? How would they, discuss that?
Mm. Yeah, it's a really important topic. We did relatively less studies on parents when compared to coaches and board members. But in the studies we did, we found that the coach has a very large impact on the positive side, like on engagement and autonomous motivation, while the parents have a very large impact on controlled motivation and amotivation. So there's indeed a lot of pressure coming from parents. And we actually do it a bit in the same way. Like, for instance, we made like cases where a child is sitting with his parent in the car and is driving to a game. And we have written down a conversation. And then when we give a session to parents, we present the conversation and we have them discuss it and ask like, what do you like about this conversation? What do you dislike? And then based on that, we discuss with them the impact it has on the child. So these are parent information sessions that can be integrated in the club. And we also advise sport clubs to really define their values and from these values give information sessions to parents, like this is our vision, this is what we stand for, this you can expect from our coaches, this we do not want to see in the club. So trying to really outline the expectations in upfront so that it's really clear. And then
I think a club approach is really interesting and important. I think you touched on something that I don't think we've tried that much in Quebec. I think it's really important. I think also maybe developing coaches' abilities to transmit that, like there's something in understanding it and trying to do it themselves, but also trying to explain it to parents and maybe other coaches and things like that.
We had one basketball club in Flanders, and they gave like a lolly to the parents before the game with a little note like, if your emotions become too high, just take the lolly. So it was really a nice awareness raising campaign, I think. Yeah.
Thank you for that question and answer. Oh, there's another question from Geneviève Majou.
It's a very researcher question about the first belief that you presented, the study with the vignettes and the comic strip. You looked at the impact on need support, merging all three needs together, but do you remember if you looked at it with the three needs separately and if you remember the results?
I'm not sure we did it. I don't remember, but I can have a look after the session and get back to you. I don't know by heart.
It was
Yeah.
if you remembered on the top of your head, because I was wondering if both competence and autonomy was impacted by the manipulation.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
No, I should have a look. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a really, really interesting question because we have not studied it yet in sports coaching, but we did in parent-child relationships, where we also examined, if children, for instance, react in a controlling way to their parents, what behavior it elicits in the parents. And it's the work of Bart Soenens mainly. And so the idea is that the relationships are always bi-directional, and so also the child can elicit certain behaviors in the parents. And so we are now first examining these dynamics, but the idea would be indeed to intervene on both sides of the communication, and not only on the teacher or only on the coach, but also intervene on how athletes can co-create a more positive environment for themselves with their coaches or children, how they can negotiate, for instance, in an autonomy supportive rather than a controlling way, which elicits then more positive responses. Yeah. Because also the response to a negotiation will depend on how the negotiation is conducted. Thank you, Laura.
So is there a last question? Maybe we still have time. I don't think so. I think it's we're done.
I want to thank you very, very, very much, Lynn. It was impressive, the amount of work that you did during the last couple of years. And I think it's 15 years you mentioned. It's impressive and it's very needed. Thank you so much. And we are very happy to have you on board with us in the research chair to help us develop this part that is not really your fixed expertise, but you will be you are a great addition to our team. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.